I thought I was ready for fatherhood, but I quickly realized that when I became a father, I was making mistakes that could have cost me connection with my daughter, with my wife, and ultimately the leadership that my family needed. And so in today's video, I want to give you 3 mistakes that I made as a new father and what I wish I would have known sooner. What's up, family? You know, I've always heard that being a parent is hard. And let me tell you something to that, right? Let me say something. It is hard, bro. It's hard. It's scary. Bro, it's intimidating. It makes you question yourself. But the fact that you're watching me, it tells me that you do care about being a good father. The fact that you're willing to learn and grow and you're already showing that you want to be good at this, it shows me you have what it takes. And you're not alone in this because every great father has had moments of doubt. But the key to being a great father is to keep showing up, to keep leading with love, and to keep growing and learning, because you won't be perfect, but you will be present. And that's what your family needs. That's what they desire from you. And that journey of learning and growing, listen, it starts with recognizing where you went wrong and where you can do better. And I know this firsthand because when I became a father, I had some blind spots, bro. And there were some things I didn't even see. There were some things I didn't even consider. I didn't even think through some of these things because it wasn't on my radar. This was my first time, bro, being a father. And like some of you, this is going to be your first time. And so what I want to do is I want to put some things on your radar that weren't on mine in hopes of just helping you to avoid unnecessary mistakes. Because trust and believe, you're going to be making mistakes, but you don't have to make all of the mistakes. And so here are 3 mistakes that I made as a new father. First mistake that I made, not grieving the past. The first mistake I made as a new father was I did not take the time to grieve the kind of life that I had before my daughter entered it. Like I didn't even know that that was a thing. And so I remember that when we had our baby, when we had our daughter, we were in the hospital. 2 days later, the doctor says, you know what? You're cleared. You guys can go ahead and take your daughter home. Whew. Now, remember those feelings I mentioned a few moments ago about feeling scared and nervous and intimidated? Trust me, those feelings entered right there. As a matter of fact, let me bring it back some. As a matter of fact, the moment you enter into the delivery room and you see that bed, you see the equipment, you see the machines, you immediately start saying to yourself, oh, it's about to get real. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm not telling you this to scare you, but I am telling you this to normalize it, bro. It's normal. And so we get our daughter home, right? I say about a few weeks, maybe a month later, I begin to start feeling down, angry, depressed, right? And so as the weeks kept going and the months kept going, I started to realize that, hey, I'm angry. I'm dissatisfied with the very gift that God gave us, my daughter. And I remember my wife, she began to realize it, and she was becoming like concerned with where I was mentally. And at some point, bro, at some point, I had to recognize that I was upset with my daughter because her arrival was interfering with my personal fulfillment. This is what I mean, my personal fulfillment. I could no longer do the things that I love to do at the capacity and the level that I love to do them at. Like the things that I had going on, the things that I love to do, those things had to take a back seat. It started to look different. And at one point, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that change. And so I told myself, hey, this is just a discipline problem. Like if you get disciplined enough, you can be able to be fully here as a father, and you can be fully here as engaging in everything that you love. And ultimately, man, that just left me stressed out. That just put me into a more funk because it wasn't sustainable. And so at some point, I had to give in and accept that life will not look the same as it once did. There's going to be some things that I can't do anymore, or at least there's some things that I can't do anymore right now. But watch this. Just because life won't look the way it used to doesn't mean that it can't look better than it used to. Had to hear that, right? And I probably could have avoided experiencing so many dark moments if I had known beforehand that I needed to grieve what used to be, that I had to stop fixating on what used to be. Luke chapter 9 says that no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Listen, in other words, no one who sets out to begin a work or an assignment that he has before him while fixating on what's behind him is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Why? Because he will be distracted with what's behind him, which will result in him being ineffective and unproductive in the work he has to do in front of him. That's key. And as a new parent, if you're steady looking at what life used to look like, you're not going to be able to be the parent you desire to be. So the first mistake that I made as a father was, number one, not grieving the past. Here it is. The second mistake that I made, having unrealistic expectations. This was me placing unrealistic expectations on my daughter, on a child, expecting her to behave in a way that babies her age had no ability to. See, I don't know about you, but I was raised in a family dynamic where misbehaving children was unacceptable. Like when I tell you to do something or when I ask you to do something, that's what I mean. You listen. When I tell you not to do something, you listen. That was the dynamic that I was raised in. And I had always told myself internally that I will raise children, that will be behaved, that they will be respectful, that they would do what they are told and what they're asked to do. Like that's what I'm used to. Now watch the biggest mistake that I could ever make. The biggest mistake that I could have made that actually made it worse was that I defined my baby's behavior as misbehavior. It's so hilarious to say that out loud, but that's the reality back then for me. And if I'm honest, that's something that I still have to be intentional about overcoming. And so I was defining that. I was defining her behavior. So when she would yell, when she would scream, when she would not do what I asked her to do, I was just chucking that up as, hey, you being bad. And that was setting me up. That was just setting me up for failure, if I'm gonna just be 100. And so that was a problem because I was defining it as that versus just being a normal child who's new on this earth, who don't have the ability to actually manage their emotions and actually communicate what they need and what they feel. So it was cruel of me to do that. Ephesians chapter 6, it instructs us as fathers to not exasperate our children, but to bring them up in the instruction of the Lord. And so this means that us as fathers, we are called to not overly agitate and irritate our children and bringing them into a place of anger. And we have to be intentional about avoiding unfair and cruel behavior. And unrealistic expectations placed on a child is just that. It's cruel. It's unfair. And so here it is. The first mistake that I made as a new father was I did not grieve the past. The second mistake that I made as a new father was I had unrealistic expectations for my child. And lastly, here it is, number 3. The third mistake that I made as a new father was this: not communicating my limits. Oh, man. Something we have to accept, especially as men, is that we all have limits, whether you want to admit it, whether you want to accept it or not. We all have physical limits, emotional limits, mental limits. We all have limits. And at some point, those limits will be reached while raising your children. Yes, your precious, your sweet, your innocent baby is going to push you to your limits. I promise you. And my mistake was I was not accepting that fact. And I was trying to push through situations when I knew that I was at my limits with my daughter. I knew that. And see, I'm the kind of man, watch this, I'm the kind of man who value being a good man, who value being a good husband and a good father. And I knew going into this season of being a new parent, I wanted to be a strong support for my wife. I knew that. Now, I had read about the postpartum depression. I read about that in women after they have children. And so I told myself, listen, I may not be able to prevent her from experiencing that completely, but I also said to myself that I never wanted to be a contributing factor in any way to her slipping into postpartum. And so I remember one time our child was waking up, right? We woke up in the middle of the night. She wanted to eat. My wife woke up. She was exhausted. I was exhausted. Let me tell you, I was exhausted. I was so exhausted to where when she got up, I barely could get up, but I pushed myself to get up. And I remember I had no energy to even talk. All I could do was put my hand on her back just to let her know that I'm here and that I'm a support. Just to let her know that. And by the grace of God and the awareness that my wife had, we suggested something that kept me from self-destructing and kept me from self-sabotaging. We created shifts. She worked the night, I worked the day. That was the best thing that we could have ever came up with, right? And so what am I saying? I'm saying that as a new parent, you have to acknowledge, you have to communicate, and you have to make plans like in regard to your limits. And you have to resist the feelings of guilt and shame for feeling like you're not a good parent if you need a break or if you can't handle something, right? Recognizing your limits doesn't make you egotistic. It makes you realistic. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you sensible. What do I mean by that? It makes you sensible to know that, you know what? I have limits. And sometimes I'm going to need help. Sometimes I'm going to need that support. Right? Watch this. Galatians chapter 6. It calls us to help carry each other's burdens. Yes, burdens. That even means the burdens that come along with parenting. Remember, man, when y'all are parenting, this is a partnership. And your partner, either you or her, you're going to have to step in sometimes to support them when things become too much for them. But they can't help carry your burdens if you refuse to communicate those burdens. You have to communicate those limits. And so the first mistake that we have to avoid making as new fathers is this. Number one, not grieving our past. Life will not look like it used to. In the moment, the quicker you accept that and you grieve that, the quicker that you can begin to enjoy the life that you have now. Here it is. The second mistake that we have to avoid making as new fathers is this. Number two, placing unrealistic expectations on our children. Listen, be careful. You gotta be careful to not place expectations on your baby they were never meant to carry at that age. Be careful. It's cruel. It's unfair. Be careful. And lastly, the last mistake we have to avoid making as new fathers is this. Number three, not communicating your limits. That one really hit me. I can't express it. I can't say much more about it. Like, you have to remember that recognizing and responding to your limits makes you human, not heartless. Watch this. In fact, it's actually loving to embrace your limitations, because watch this, a burnt out father isn't good for the child. I'm going to show you what is good for the child though. A well-rested father, a present father, a growing father, a self-aware father. That's what's good for the child. I promise you that. And so I really pray that this man was helpful. It was encouraging at the same time. And for those of you who are entering into this season of fatherhood, man, listen, remember, you were built for this. Literally, God made you for this, champ. He made you with you being a father in mind. So you were literally built for this. And so congratulations, bro, on the new journey. I'm proud of you for wanting to be a good father and for learning. And remember this, if you don't remember nothing else, remember this. It's not about perfection, bro. It's about your willingness to remain present. Until next time, take care and go be great.